Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. This is the third and final installment of the Caylee Anthony series. This video is brought to you by Audible. Audible has over 130,000 titles to choose from in their library of audiobooks. And if you sign up for Audible using the link www.audibletrial.com/Stephanie Harlow, they'll give you a free 30-day trial and audiobook. The most amazing thing about Audible is how convenient it is. It plays on all my devices, my iPad, my iPhone. I can play it through the Google Home Mini. I can play it through Aiden's Alexa. I can play it in the car through Bluetooth when I'm driving. It's just so convenient for the die-hard lifelong reader like myself who just doesn't have the time to sit down and read a book these days. So head over there and check it out if you're interested. The worst thing that could happen is you try it out and you get a free book. Okay, let's get started on the video. The first part of this video is going to start with the discovery of Caylee Marie Anthony. On December 11th, 2008, the skeletal remains of Caylee Anthony were discovered less than a mile away from the Anthony home by none other than our friendly neighborhood meter reader, Roy Kronk. This time, his supervisor calls it in.
Yes, this is Osun County Utilities Emergency Dispatch. We found a human skull.
Oh my gosh.
I know. We got is it a meter reader?
Yes.
I'm going to let you speak right now with the representative from our field services. This is Benny with Osun County Utilities.
Hey, Benny.
Hi. I'm going to let you speak with Rusty Spare, and everything is recorded. Here he is.
How are you doing?
Hey, Rusty.
One of my meter readers supposedly has found a skull of a that he believes is human.
What's the location, please?
It's right off of Suburban and Chickasaw in the Caylee Anthony area, right by the school.
Do you have a specific address for me or not?
No, it's right by the school. If you take it,
You are.
Yeah, he's
Suburban and Goldenwood?
well, Suburban and Chickasaw.
And what is your party's name that we're going to meet with?
His name's Roy, R-O-Y, Kronk, K-R-O-N-K.
He's not touching this, I hope.
No,
K-R-O-N-K. And he's a
he's a meter reader.
meter reader?
Yeah, and I'll just tell him to stay at that location and just stay away from everything.
Okay.
Now, there are a couple questionable things about the discovery of Caylee's body. Why did Roy Kronk, after 4 months of seemingly no interest after his initial discovery, go back to the site in December? Caylee's body was found in a wooded area on the corner of Hope Spring Drive where the Anthonys lived and Suburban Drive. Her remains were placed just 20 feet off the road. Now, the landscape in December was completely different from the landscape in June or July when Caylee would have been placed there. The Atlantic hurricane season is a time period that usually runs from June 1st to November 30th. And it affects the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico, and by default, also Florida. On July 16th, Tropical Storm Cristobal had dropped some moderate rainfall on Florida and caused a little flooding in the area. July 22nd saw heavy rainfall from Hurricane Dolly. And in mid-August, Tropical Storm Faye hit Florida really hard, causing a lot of flooding, a lot of damage, and 36 deaths. So to sum it all up, the area where Caylee was found was on a slight downslope. So in June and July, when people were out looking for Caylee, when all the volunteers were out looking, when all the public was out looking, that area would have pretty much been underwater. And because the EcoSearch company told their volunteers not to search in areas of standing water because it could pose potential dangers to the volunteers, this area would have been just really routinely searched but not deeply looked into, especially the area of water where Caylee's body would have been. But in December, not only had the water receded, but the foliage was much less dense. There was many less obstacles in the way of seeing the little girl's body that had been thrown into an area that had clearly been used as a trash dump by locals. According to Jose Baez, when Caylee's remains were found, they set Casey up to hear the news and then record her reaction. So they decided they were going to bring her to the medical unit where they sat her down and they had a TV there that was playing the news. And on the news it was reported that a little girl's body was found close to the Anthony home. There was no confirmation that it was Caylee, of course, until an autopsy was done. But Casey reacted in this way.
Hyperventilating and bent over in grief. A newly released prison video shows a grainy image of Casey Anthony as she learned a child's body had been discovered in a swamp near her parents' Orlando home.
So once again, it would not be confirmed that this child was Caylee until a week later when the autopsy was performed. Some people think Casey Anthony's reaction is telling because she doesn't know, or she's not supposed to know, that it's Caylee, but she acts as if she does already know that it's Caylee. So possibly she is the one that put Caylee's body there. Possibly she is crying for herself and the new evidence they now have against her. Others say that she did know it was Caylee, that she intuitively, as a mother, knew it was her child who was found, and she was crying because she now knew her daughter was dead. My initial reaction is Casey was crying because she knew it was Caylee, because she had something to do with putting her there. That's just my opinion. For a woman who showed very little emotion throughout the entire process, for her to break down crying now would be out of character, but it is possible, of course. A forensics team spent an entire week combing through the area in which Caylee was found, trying to recover the entire skeleton. Almost all of Caylee's skeleton was found, besides a few small bones from the wrist and hands, fingers, ankle, and kneecap. In the next segment, I'm going to be discussing the results of Caylee Anthony's autopsy. It's very upsetting information. It was hard for me to read about it and to kind of have to put it in my own words. So if you are sensitive to this kind of material, then you should just fast forward through the next couple of minutes. And when I'm done talking about this kind of information, I will raise my hand like this so you know when to stop fast forwarding. I wish I could tell you what the timestamp would be, but I cannot right now because I haven't really finished recording or editing, so I don't know when the timestamp will be. I just feel like it's easier to give you a signal, so that's what I'm gonna do. Dr. Jan Garvalia spent 12 days examining the remains. Caylee's body was already completely skeletonized. In the months that she'd laid there with the humidity of Florida and the extreme rainfall they had had that season, it had sped up the decomposition process quite a bit. She concluded there was no evidence of trauma on the skeleton. There was 3 pieces of duct tape wrapped around the skull 3 times, covering her mandible and maxilla, essentially the area from the bottom of the chin to the nose. The autopsy reported that they determined the tape had been placed there before decomposition, so either before she died or shortly thereafter. Dr. Garvalia determined that there was no reason to think the body had not been there the entire time since Caylee had been killed. There was plant life and vegetation growing around and through the skeleton. The results showed she'd been wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket, placed into a canvas laundry bag, and then placed into 2 large garbage bags. Pink glittery letters that had once spelled out big and trouble were also found scattered around the remains. These were letters that would have been on a shirt she was wearing. A pair of shorts labeled 24 months were also found close to the body. In the time that Caylee had been discarded in the woods, animals had gotten into the bag where she was placed and pulled out her remains. They were able to determine this from marks on the bone that suggested animal activity, as well as the fact that the skeleton had been pulled out and scattered. According to the autopsy, the death was ruled a homicide, even though there was no sign of trauma on the child's body. Dr. Garvalia said the skull of someone who has died in an accident does not have duct tape covering the mouth and nose. Sticker residue shaped like a heart, about the size of a dime, was over the duct tape that would have been over Caylee's mouth. And it led investigators to believe that a sticker in the shape of a heart was placed over the duct tape on her mouth. There was no DNA found on this duct tape, not from Caylee or anybody else, and there were no fingerprints found on this duct tape. Okay, all good. On January 22nd, 2009, George Anthony took a bunch of pills from his house, got in his car, and drove to Daytona Beach, where he checked into a motel. The Anthony family lawyer reported George missing and that he had taken with him a bunch of medication. The next day, the authorities found George Anthony in the motel in Daytona Beach, and they also found a suicide note that he had written. Cynthia Marie. That's Cindy. As you get this letter, this should be no surprise that I've decided to leave the earth because I need to be with Caylee Marie. I cannot keep on going because it should be me that is gone from this earth, not her. I have lived many years. I'm satisfied with my decision because I have never been the man you, Lee, Casey, and especially Caylee Marie deserved. I have never been the man any of you could count on. I've always let each of you down in more ways than I could remember. I do not feel sorry for myself. I am just sorry I burden you all the way I have. My loss of life is meaningless. I cannot be strong anymore. Caylee Marie, our granddaughter. I miss her. I miss her so much. I know you do too. You were always the one that provided for her. What did I provide? I blame myself for her being gone. You know, for months, as a matter of fact, for a year or so, I brought stuff up only to be told not to be negative. I sit here falling apart because I should have done more. She was so close to home. Why was she there? Who placed her there? Why is she gone? Why? For months, you and I, especially you, always questioned why. I want this to go away for Casey. What happened? Why could she not come to us? Especially you. Why not Lee? Who was involved with this stuff for Caylee? I am going crazy because I want to go after these people Casey hung with prior to Caylee being gone. That is why I got that gun. I wanted to scare those people. You know, they know more than they have stated. You cannot sugarcoat, kid glove these people. They need hard knocks to get info from. Sure, that will not bring Caylee Marie back, but was Casey threatened? You know, Casey does not deserve to be where she is. I miss her so much. I am worried for her. Her personal safety is always on my mind. I cannot function knowing our granddaughter is gone. Caylee Marie never had a chance to grow. I have taken what meds was given to me with alcohol, and I am ready to give up. As I can tell by my writing and thinking, I am getting very stupid. Wow, what a word. Stupid. Yes, I am. Again, I do not feel sorry for myself, but yes, I am stupid. Cannot deal with this stuff anymore. The loss of Caylee Marie, the loss of Casey, the loss of us, Cynthia Marie, the meds. I am ready. Saying goodbye, please understand it is for the best. I do not deserve life anymore. Any more us. You know, I never got to say goodbye. I am at this place, and all is getting fuzzy, and my writing is all over the place. I love you. I love you. I hope you get to see Casey soon. All the people we met. Wow, the writing is getting weird. I love you. I am sorry. I will take care of Caylee once I get to God. I am so tired. At least I shaved today. Wow, I'm tripping out. I am sorry. I love you, Cynthia Marie. Caylee, here I come. So George Anthony writes the suicide letter, and he allegedly takes all these pills with alcohol, and he wants to end his life, which I understand. He loved his granddaughter. Finding her dead is traumatic for everybody who hears about this news. Nobody really expected it or wanted it to be true, I think. And then once they find out that they've been looking for a little girl who's been gone the whole time, it was traumatic, and he was upset. A lot of people have said that this suicide note is a confession of sorts or indicates his guilt in some way, especially Jose Baez, who tried to use it against him in the trial of Casey Anthony. I don't see this note as a confession at all or any admission of guilt, besides feeling guilty that he wasn't the best husband or father he could have been, that he had gone through periods where he wasn't as supportive or helpful as he could have been. In fact, he's actually questioning, how did this happen? Who put her there? Why is she gone? But he does suggest in this note something that he says later, that he believes Casey's friends or the people Casey was hanging out with were somehow involved in Caylee's disappearance. On April 13th, 2009, prosecutors announced that they plan to seek the death penalty for Casey Anthony. The prosecutors alleged that Casey used chloroform, which she made herself, to subdue her daughter and then placed duct tape over her mouth to suffocate her. She then placed the child's body in the trunk of her car for a few days before disposing of it. On June 19th, 2009, Caylee's autopsy is released. And because of the sunshine law that we talked about last video, it's released to everybody who wants to see it. The defense files a motion to take the death penalty off the table, and on December 18th, 2009, Judge Stan Strickland, the same cool-ass judge who said Miss Anthony and the truth are strangers, he denied that motion. He said it should be up to the jury once they decide whether she's guilty or not to decide whether or not she should get the death penalty. In April of 2010, a correctional officer named Sylvia Hernandez was suspended with pay for passing notes between Casey Anthony and some of the other inmates, which was not allowed for inmates who were in protective custody. One of the other inmates was named Robin Adams, a convicted drug dealer. Robin Adams told the police that Casey had admitted to her that she had knocked her daughter out sometimes because she wouldn't sleep. She claimed initially that Casey had said she had used antihistamines, but later she changed her story and said Casey had used chloroform. The letters to Adams show that Casey felt a close relationship with this girl, or at least pretended to. Casey often talks about what they're going to do when they get released, how they'll travel, go to this place, go to that place. Casey's going to dye her hair blonde or red so people don't recognize her, and they'll just live a simple life on the road. Robin gave another inmate over 50 letters that Casey had handwritten her because she didn't want to keep them in her own cell. Since Casey was such a high-profile inmate, she really didn't want to have anything to do with being in possession of those letters. In a letter to the inmate she'd given the letters of Casey to, she said, "Thanks for doing something with these." And then she goes on to say, "I'm crying every day over my kids," and she's talking to me about going to Costa Rica. Another inmate named Maya Durkovic said she used to talk with Casey through the jail's ventilation system since they were in cells right next to each other. She also claims Casey told her she used chloroform on her daughter and that she knew details about her daughter's body before the body was discovered.
Well, she said that she used to knock the baby out so she can go party. And she would put her to sleep, and then when she'll come back, the baby will still be asleep, and the next day she's awake. So that's how that came up.
Did she say what she used to knock her out?
I can't pronounce it. I can't pronounce it that well. Foam. I can't pronounce it. It's I don't know much about it, but I know it's some type of chemical. It's chloroform.
She said that?
Yeah. How she did it was she would pour it on like a rag, like a wash rag, and put it over the baby's face. So she'll inhale it, and that will knock her out.
Personally, I take these two women's admissions with a grain of salt. Nothing about antihistamines or chloroform was found in the 50 letters that Casey wrote to Robin Adams, so it's hearsay. She's just saying that she told her this. And Robin did say in a letter to another inmate, "This could be my way out of jail before my term." I pretty much think people in jail or prison will say anything to shorten their jail time or to benefit themselves in some way, even if it means, moving to a less secure facility or just getting certain things in prison while you're there that makes your life easier. I think they'll do and say and throw anybody under the bus that they can in order to get those things. So I don't really believe anything these women say. Casey's been lying to everyone, even her close friends. She hasn't told anybody the truth or what we believe to be the truth. Why would she all of a sudden just tell these two inmates that she barely knows? She would have plenty to make conversation about and connect with on a personal level without confessing to the murder of her daughter. So I just don't believe it. Don't get it twisted. I don't believe Casey Anthony's innocent of everything. But I do think you have to use logic instead of emotion when you are looking at this sort of evidence, and you have to ask yourself what kind of motives the people who are giving this information have to give this information. Here's a couple passages from the notes that she sent to Robin Adams, though. She says, "I had asked her to take K's for a few days so I could put the rest of our stuff together. Money I had saved, new clothes, new everything. That's why I waited to report her missing, because she was and wasn't. I would give anything to go back on that day and not have let Caylee out of my sight. My situation with living at home with K's and my folks, staying home all day and going out at night looking for Mr. Right. Same exact situation. I don't know one single mom who doesn't try to get their freedom regardless of how old they are. That's one of the biggest things that truly cuts me when I hear them talk about me as a mother. I was a great mom, and I love my daughter with everything that I have. I would give my life to have her back for even 5 minutes. It's so frustrating. Casey has really nothing good to say about her family in these letters, even considering her father's suicide attempt. She says they're really good at putting on the supportive face/person for the TV, but behind the scenes it's a daily battle, ridiculous, unnecessary, and downright shameful. But what are you going to do? I just have to keep my distance and hike up my big girl panties. And then Casey also mentions her celebrity status. Another day, another series of rumors and ridiculousness. The life of a celebrity, huh? Right. If only I were old and ugly. Then they wouldn't care. On April 19th, 2009, the awesome and honorable Judge Stan Strickland recuses himself from the Casey Anthony trial. The defense had filed this motion asking him to recuse himself because they said he was biased against Casey. Baez accused Strickland of having a personal relationship with a blogger who wrote under the name Marinade Dave. I guess Dave had taken to writing a lot of articles about Casey throughout the investigation, and once Judge Strickland had brought up Marinade Dave in some sort of proceedings, thanking him for being fair and civilized in his blog where he encouraged his readers to be respectful to the family of Casey Anthony. Even though Strickland maintained his innocence, he did recuse himself from the case, saying, "At its core, the defense counsel's motion accuses the undersigned of being a self-aggrandizing media hound. Indeed, the irony is rich." He's talking about how Jose Baez talks to the media at every chance he gets. He is also a self-aggrandizing media hound. He's replaced by Judge Balvin Perry Jr., who's also pretty cool. On June 15th, 2010, there's an evidentiary hearing for Casey Anthony's trial, and Cindy Anthony takes the stand. She gives her normal emotional and dramatic testimony about the day she found out her granddaughter was missing, and she also tries to retract her statement about how the car smelled like there had been a dead body in it by saying she just used it as a figure of speech. It's just something you say when something smells bad. The defense wanted to claim that this was not relevant to the case, and the judge disagreed with them, and her statement of the car smelling like there'd been a dead body in it was allowed to be used at trial. On September 14th, 2010, Casey Anthony expands her legal team from 3 attorneys to 6, the additional 3 allegedly all working pro bono. May 9th of 2011, the jury selection would start, and this process would take 11 days. Casey Anthony's trial started on May 25th and would go on for roughly 6 weeks. Here's a couple key points that I'm going to bring up from the trial. I wish I could go over it day by day with you, but there's so much information. The entire trial is on YouTube. I'll link it if you want. You can watch the entire thing. And it is quite interesting. So if you have time, take a look. Day 1 of the trial's opening statements. So the prosecution opens with Assistant State Attorney Linda Drain Burdick. And she goes over the timeline during the 31 days that Casey knew Caylee was missing, but did not report her missing. I did not enjoy listening to Burdick's opening statements. I felt that she took a lot of time in between statements or sentences. She talked very slowly, sort of monotone. I had to speed up the video, like the speed of the video, in order to make it through it because I was falling asleep. As Linda's going over everything, including the discovery of the little girl's body, Casey Anthony sits by with her hair done up in this weird ponytail with like a poof on the top, and she's wearing a really respectable and reserved cream top. She sits there from time to time and shakes her head in the most annoying way, like the most infuriating bobblehead doll I've ever seen.
Caylee's death allowed Casey Anthony to live the good life, at least for those 31 days.
And even when Linda Burdick goes into great detail about the way Caylee's body was found, there are no tears from Casey Anthony. There's a point where she looks like she's focusing really hard, trying to cry, but she doesn't manage it.
Caylee Anthony was born on August 9th of 2005. It was a Tuesday.
Linda talks slowly for an hour and a half, and then the judge suggests that they give the jury a break. He probably sees them like falling asleep, and he knows if they don't take a break, that they're gonna pass out and not hear anything. When they come back from the break, Linda goes on with like another hour and a half of opening statements. She finally goes over the evidence that they have against Casey, which is my main reason for talking about these opening day statements. This is when she's going to reveal that the forensics team who looked at the Anthony's hard drive of their desktop computer found internet searches on May 17th and May 21st that caused some suspicion. Based on Dr. Voss's findings of chloroform in the trunk of the car, they did an internet's keyword search for the word chloroform on the hard drive. They found searches on March 17th between 1:43 and 1:55 in the afternoon. There were searches done for the words chloroform, acetone, alcohol, and peroxide. On March 21st, 2008, between the hours of 2:16 and 2:28 p.m., searches were conducted for how to make chloroform with chloroform spelled incorrectly, self-defense, household weapons, and neck breaking. There were also Wikipedia searches on March 17th, between the hours of 1:53 and 1:58, for the words inhalation, chloroform, alcohol, and death. On March 21st, between 2:16 and 2:28 p.m., a Wikipedia search was done for the word shovel. There was also other computer searches done using the websites blogspot.com, scipot.com, and druglibrary.org, as well as instructables.com. The search terms used on these websites were making weapons out of household products, chloroform habit, how to make chloroform. According to the prosecution, Cindy Anthony was working both of these days at both of these times, and George Anthony was working on March 21st at these times. Also, before and after these searches were performed, Casey Anthony's social media was being accessed, so her MySpace page and things like that before and after the searches. The prosecution says it could be no one other than Casey Anthony making these searches. It could be no one other than Casey Anthony, who murdered her daughter and left her on the side of the road. After all these heavy words, literally, the judge comes in and he's like, all right, guys, it's time to break for lunch. And he sounds so cheerful. I just was really taken aback by it.
And that is that Casey Anthony is guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to recess a little early for lunch.
I mean, he just seems like a really happy-go-lucky guy, but I'm trying to process all this dark information, and he just pops in with like, what's for lunch, guys? The jury comes back from lunch, and this time Casey's hair is now placed in a bun with the same weird poof in the front. And she maybe thought this would make her look more matronly or motherly. Probably Jose Baez was like, listen, you don't look plain enough. Put your hair in a bun. Plain, boring girls who don't kill their kids, they wear their hair in buns. So it's Jose Baez's turn to give opening statements, and I actually enjoyed his opening statements much more than Linda Burdick's, just because he has a better intonation and tonal quality of his voice. He spoke at a better pace. He seemed warmer and more friendly and open and relatable, which of course was his plan. Compared to Linda's dry, boring, awkwardly spaced testimony, Jose was smooth. His speech was measured and pleasant, and he had more of a way of addressing the jury in a personal manner, just like his idol, Mr. Johnny Cochran. Jose starts off directly addressing the jury, thanking them for their time and sacrifice, acknowledging that it can't be easy to be here, and we are going to get you home as soon as possible.
On behalf of the defense, I want to thank you for the sacrifice that you've made in your jury service and coming here and helping us see justice. We know it's no easy task, and we intend, I'm sure both sides, on getting you home as quickly as possible once you have all of the information that you need.
This is obviously a very smart move. He's acknowledging the jury and their sacrifice. He's making them feel noticed and worthy and smart and appreciated. He does this as a way to endear them to him. He begins by saying there's a problem with the investigation. It reached a level of desperation. The investigation primarily focused on Casey from the get-go and didn't really take into consideration any other suspects or options. He paints the picture of the police and the prosecution having tunnel vision and having no real evidence, only circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is evidence that relies on an inference to connect it to a conclusion of fact. He says you can't be distracted by emotion. We all chose you because we thought you were the best people to sit and hear this trial. We aren't the media. We don't have the opportunity to speculate and sensationalize. We have to use our brains. And we know you guys have brains. You're smart. That's why we picked you. And then literally 8 minutes in, he drops the bomb of the trial. He says Caylee Anthony was never missing. Caylee died on the afternoon of June 16th, 2008, when she drowned in the family's swimming pool. Jose said that Caylee loved to swim. She could get out of the house very easily, and she could get into the pool. Jose goes on trying to make this seem as if it's a common occurrence. The number one way that children in Florida die is from accidental drowning in the swimming pool. And it makes sense, right? Florida's really hot. In the summer, it's unbearable. Every single person almost has a swimming pool. So it would make sense just because there's more hot weather, which means more time to swim, and there's more availability of swimming pools, because in New York, I mean, it's like maybe 1 or 2 people in the neighborhood have a swimming pool because we have 2 months of really bad heat if we're lucky. But in Florida, it's hot all year round, and in the summer, it's so hot. If you didn't have a swimming pool, you wouldn't want to leave your house. So it just makes sense due to the availability of swimming pools, due to the extended season of heat in Florida, that maybe there are a lot of accidental swimming pool deaths with children. But he's trying to make this seem commonplace. Like, this happens every day, guys. This isn't anything crazy. This isn't neglect. This isn't murder. This is an accident, and it happens all the time. And I mean, this is true, right? Sure, it happens all the time. But how many of those situations that Jose's talking about did the mother of the child who accidentally drowned in the pool cover it up? I'll wait. He then dropped another bomb. He alleged that George Anthony had been molesting Casey since she was 8 years old. He said after Caylee died, Casey did what she'd been doing all her life. She pretended everything was okay. He said Casey was used to experiencing trauma and horrible things at home, and then going to school the next day and hanging out with her friends and acting as if life was normal and everything was fine. This was her defense mechanism. This was the way she'd been living for almost her entire life. This was what she was good at, and it was what she knew.
That will help you understand why no one knew that her child was dead. That's the most important thing you must keep in the back of your mind, is that sex abuse does things to us. It changes you.
I don't know if Casey Anthony was molested by her father. I don't think she was. She had never told anybody that she was. In fact, she had been asked if she'd ever been molested by the psychiatrist, and she said no. And she told everybody everything about her life. Why would she never have used that to be viewed as the victim, which she loved to be viewed as? So I find it hard to believe, especially considering after these opening statements, Jose Baez never brought any proof of this alleged abuse. So it's only Casey's word, and we know Casey is a liar. He never brought up the abuse again at all during the rest of the trial. Never. He just used it as a way to plant reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds. We'll obviously never know what happened. Casey says he did. George says he didn't. But why did she want to talk to him so badly when she was in jail? Why, above everyone else, did she want to talk to her father? Why did she tell him, you're a good father, you're a good grandfather, don't ever think you weren't? There's nothing to stop her at this time from saying, like, what you did to me was horrible, and I've talked to a bunch of psychiatrists, and I'm getting therapy in here, and I am ready to tell you this is terrible. I just don't think it happened. I think it was a ploy and a tactic used by the defense team, which is not the first time something like that would be used, and not the last time either. So Jose Baez is actually really smart, because the main thing that people have a problem with when it comes to Casey Anthony is the way she acted between the time when she knew Caylee was missing and the time that it was reported, how she didn't report her missing for 31 days. So he uses this alleged abuse to show that her mental state was just damaged to begin with, that this was just how she knew how to react to things that were hard or stressful or painful. She would shut down and pretend everything was okay. It's actually brilliant, because when I was listening to it, I was like, wow, that totally makes sense. And I'm like, what are you talking about, Stephanie? Don't listen to this guy. He's like a siren. He's a sea siren, and he's bringing me to the rocks where my ship will crash on the beach of Casey Anthony might not have done this. And I can't let that happen. So according to the defense, the day that Caylee drowned in the swimming pool, Casey was inside the house. George Anthony came in yelling at her, and he doesn't even seem like the guy who yells that much. He seems like a pretty meek and mild guy to me, but he came in and he was yelling at her, and he's like, "Where's Caylee?" I don't know why he's yelling already, but Casey was like, "I don't know." So they were searching the house. They couldn't find Caylee. So they both went outside to look for her. Casey left, I think, by the side or front door to go around the house, and George went out the back door towards where the family pool was in the backyard. As Casey's coming around the house, going towards the backyard, she sees George Anthony holding her daughter, Caylee, who is dead, in his arms. And she rushes towards him, takes her daughter, and she's crying, and then he begins to scream at her. "Look what you've done. This is your fault. Your mother will never forgive you, and you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life." Does this even seem plausible? Like, who's doing this? Who's doing this? Who's yelling at somebody like that when they find out their granddaughter's dead? I don't see this happening. He seems so deferential to her. He seems so like, "Oh, I don't want to make you upset. I don't want to upset you." They both did. I can't imagine either of them ever yelling at her like that. She's crazy. So she looks up at her father and she asks for his help. And according to Jose Baez, George Anthony helped her, because that sounds like something an ex-police officer would do. An ex-police officer would take a laundry bag from his own home, because that laundry bag that Caylee was found in was one of a set of two, and the other one was found in the Anthony home. So he would take a laundry bag out of his own home to put the body in. He would take duct tape out of his own home and put it on the mouth of a child who was already dead. For what reason? He would then put the body in a car of some kind, maybe for a day or two, and then dump it on the side of the road, the granddaughter that he loved so much. And George Anthony was, like I just said, an ex-cop who would know that a child who died in a swimming pool accident would not be grounds to send the parent to jail for the rest of their life. Covering up the accidental death of this child would be enough grounds to send the parent to jail, but Jose Baez says that on June 15th, when Cindy and Caylee went swimming, Father's Day, remember, she may have forgotten to put the ladder up in the pool. They were usually really religious about it. And my mother-in-law has a pool, and she's super strict about making sure like the gate is locked with a padlock. She has the key. Nobody can get in that pool because she doesn't want the kids to accidentally get in and drown. So they were super religious about making sure that the gate was locked and the ladder was up. But Jose Baez claims that on June 17th, Cindy Anthony went to work and told a couple of her coworkers that she thought someone was swimming in her pool. And they said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Somebody left the gate unlocked and the ladder down. And I know for a fact that we always lock the gate and put the ladder up." Jose Baez says law enforcement had this information, but they ignored it. He says professional police work took a back seat in this case. They had evidence that the pool had been tampered with or had maybe not been as secure as the Anthonys had previously thought. And they ignored it because they had tunnel vision on Casey and they just wanted to pin the murder on Casey. He claims after the report of the missing persons for Caylee Anthony was filed, Cindy Anthony once again told Detective Melich about the pool ladder and the pool not being secure, and he ignored this information. Maybe because they were so busy driving Casey Anthony all around town, looking into addresses that nobody lived at, going to Universal Studios that nobody worked at. Maybe they were so busy doing that they couldn't follow up on the tip. Then Jose Baez comes in with more tea. One of the volunteers looking for Caylee was named Crystal Holloway, also known as River Cruz, for some reason. This woman claimed that while the search for his granddaughter was going on, she and George Anthony were having an affair. Now let's break away from the trial for a minute and talk about my own research into Miss River Cruz, or Crystal Holloway, whatever. She's not a very reliable person. She claimed that George Anthony told her what happened to Caylee. He said it was an accident that snowballed out of control, which strikes me as odd because she used that same sentence, an accident that snowballed out of control. And in the trial, Jose Baez used that exact same terminology. This was an accident that snowballed out of control. So it almost seems as if she was possibly coached to say these words. She claims she had no monetary motivation for coming forward with this, yet she sold her story to the National Enquirer, the boxed wine of news media outlets. George Anthony does admit that he met Crystal during the search. He said that she came to him and told him she had a tumor, that she was probably going to die. So he offered her comfort and support like he would do for anybody. Crystal Holloway did have a text from George Anthony that said, "I miss you. I need you in my life." And George Anthony admits that he may have sent that text, but he said he sent texts like that to many of the volunteers. They all became like family as they were spending so much time together day in and day out for months on end. And he said he needed a lot of them in his life. Now let me clarify. I don't doubt that George Anthony was romantically involved with this woman. I don't doubt that there was some kind of romantic relationship or physical relationship that went outside of her normal volunteer duties. Does this mean to me that George Anthony killed his granddaughter or covered up her death? Nope. It means George Anthony's a liar and kind of a bad husband, but we already knew that. Does it mean that George Anthony is going to confess to this woman something that could put himself and his daughter in prison? Nope. I don't believe that. Just like I don't believe Casey would confess to somebody in jail. I don't believe George Anthony would confess to somebody outside of jail. These two people are narcissistic. They have self-preservation as their first priority. It's all about them. Casey's a lot more like her father than she would like to admit. Self-preservation does not mean admitting to a crime that you committed, that you're trying to say you didn't commit. It just doesn't. After Jose Baez is done assassinating George Anthony's character, he goes on to assassinate the character of Roy Kronk, the man who found Caylee's body, several times. He says Roy Kronk is a morally bankrupt individual who took Caylee's body and hid it because of the large reward it came with. When Roy found the body, he thought he'd won the lottery. Jose claims that because the wooded area was the closest wooded area to the Anthony home, it would have been and probably was the first area searched. Caylee was missing for 6 months, yet her body was found very close to the side of the road, only about 19 to 20 feet off of it. Now, as we already discussed briefly before, the landscape was very different. Jose did not take into consideration that in the months that the volunteers were first looking, which would have been right after she went missing in July, or she was reported missing in July, they would have been looking in July when all that rain was coming, all those tropical storms. It was a really heavy rainfall summer for Florida. That area would have been under standing water. And if they had looked at that area initially, which he said in his statement, that would have been one of the first areas they looked at when they went to look at this area. Being one of the first areas, it would have been really wet and underwater, so they wouldn't have seen the body. Also, these volunteers would have been looking for a body, not a skeleton. Nobody really would take into account how fast decomposition would happen with the rain and the humidity. In this case especially, they had stated that they believed the body was well on its way to being fully decomposed within a month or two of it being placed there. Jose claims that Roy Kronk found Caylee's body someplace else and brought it there and dumped it there, close to the Anthony's home, so that he could, basically cause a media sensation, become famous, and get his money. A co-worker of Roy Kronk's would testify that the day that Roy initially saw Caylee's body, or thinks he saw a skull back in August, he and the friend were walking by the woods, and the friend said, "This would be a good place to hide a body." And Roy Kronk was like, "You're right, it would." And then all of a sudden he had to pee, and he went into the woods and came back and was like, "Guys, I think I saw a skull." And they were all like, "No, no way." Then they got distracted by the snake and it fell to the wayside. Roy Kronk's son would testify that a month before Caylee's body was found, Roy called his son and said, "Watch for me on TV. I just found Caylee's body and I'm going to be rich and famous." What is really not brought to light by Jose Baez is the relationship with Roy Kronk and his children. It's estranged. And I think this could have been looked at as like an admission of, I know where the body is and I'm going to place it somewhere, but I don't at all think that was it. I think it was Roy trying to connect with his kids on some level, trying to just, I have a cool story, so now I can call somebody and tell them and, you know, they'll listen to me. On December 10th, the day before Caylee's body was found, Roy Kronk's car broke down, and the repair bill was quite high, much more than Roy could afford. Jose Baez claims that this was Roy's time to now cash in on his lotto ticket that he believed he had, and the next day he had the Anthony route again, and he went back to the woods and discovered the body again. What really hurt Roy Kronk in this testimony was the fact that he had told the police he had not disturbed or touched the body at all, but then he admitted that he had kind of shook the bag that the body was in, or some of the body was in, or whatever. He shook it with his meter stick, and that's when the skull rolled out, because it was underneath the bag, I suppose. And when the skull rolled out, he then took his meter stick again and placed it in the eye socket of the skull to lift it up so he could get a better look and make sure that it really was a human skull. What an idiot. I understand why he did it. It's like a little boy who finds something in the woods and wants to get a closer look. But it's so stupid, and it made him look so bad. Now let's discuss the character assassination of Roy Kronk really quickly. The suggestion that Roy hid her remains, like he found them and then took them so he could plant them there later, that's absolutely ridiculous. Why would anybody do that? Yes, he probably wanted to get paid for finding her. So it's not ridiculous that he would have monetary motivation for being involved with this. This is human nature, right? People are selfish. People put themselves first. People always look at a situation and say, what can I gain from this? That's normal. You have a million people in this case who have tried to use Caylee's disappearance and subsequent death to their advantage. The people who were searching for Caylee, hoping for the $250,000 reward. Leonard Padilla, who was hoping for the reward. Casey's prison buddies, who were hoping for a break in their sentence. Crystal or River, Cruz, whatever her name is, who sold her story to the National Enquirer. Casey herself for coming up with an idea to take pictures of herself and autograph them and sell them for money, and selling pictures of her daughter to a news network to make money to pay for her defense of the murder of her daughter. Jose Baez himself, who allowed Casey to do such a thing, to put money in his own pocket for her defense. Why is Ray Kronk the only morally bankrupt individual in this scenario? From what I can see, Mr. Baez, there are many morally bankrupt individuals sprinkled throughout this situation. Plus, if you want to talk scientific evidence, which Jose Baez says there is none, there's only circumstantial evidence in this case, there was a great deal of plant growth and vegetation that had grown throughout and around the baby's skeleton. There was no sign that the body had been moved ever. Period. Jose Baez wants to talk about desperation and grasping, but that's exactly what he's doing here. This is desperate. This is grasping. This is just using somebody else's character flaws to cause reasonable doubt to get your client off, and that's his job. When Jose starts talking about how Casey could go to prison for life or even get the death penalty, and how the jury needs to think really hard about this because it's somebody's life on the line, that's when Casey starts crying. That's when Casey finds her tears. Not when the prosecution is describing the way her baby daughter's body was found discarded like trash. But when Jose's talking about her life being affected, maybe ending, that's when she can summon up the tears to cry for herself. On day 8 of the trial, Jeff Hopkins gets on the stand. Now, this is the same Jeff Hopkins that Casey claimed she told about Caylee being missing. This is the same Jeff Hopkins who introduced her to Zanny the nanny, because Zanny also watches his son, Zach. Same Jeff Hopkins. Jeff says they met in middle school. They didn't really know each other well. They weren't really friends, but they were acquaintances, and they had kept in touch sort of with social media over the years. He did work at Universal Studios for 1 year in 2002, but he did not work there at the same time as Casey and never saw her there. He never lived in Jacksonville or North Carolina. He didn't know anybody named Zenaida. He never had a woman named Zenaida watch his son. In fact, he doesn't even have a son. He He doesn't have kids. He claims he didn't see her in June of 2008 at all and only briefly saw her at a restaurant in July of 2008 on July 2nd, and they just met there by chance. He was there with people, she was there with people, and they talked briefly, how are you doing, how are you doing, exchanged numbers, and that was it. He says the only time she contacted him after was sending mass texts promoting Fusion Friday nights at the club, and he was involved in these texts with multiple other people. Once again, Jeff claims he was never told Caylee was missing. He knew that Casey had a daughter, but he had never even met Caylee. Jose gets up and says to him, is your name Jeffrey Michael Hopkins? And Jeff's like, no, because his middle name's not Michael. His name's Jeffrey Hopkins, but his middle name is not Michael. Jose Baez asks Jeff if he had a crush on Casey in middle school. And Jeff says, I can't say. Like, I don't really remember. And Jose says, you can't say or you don't want to say. Like, who's going to get up on stand and lie about having a crush on someone in middle school? It's just ridiculous. And Jeff's like, yeah, she was an attractive young woman in middle school. Like, I guess I had a crush on her. A lot of people did. Literally, I don't know what this had to do with the case at all, but it was allowed to be asked. I think Jose was probably trying to suggest that maybe Jeff had like an axe to grind against Casey because he had a crush on her in middle school and she didn't reciprocate. And then, he goes on to ask, like, do you know Zenaida? Do you know Juliette Lewis? Do you have a son named Zach? Do you have a mother named this? Do you have a girlfriend named this? And Jeff's like, no. And he's like trying to suggest that this Jeff Hopkins is not the same Jeff Hopkins that Casey was talking about. There's a completely different Jeff Hopkins that is all of the things that Casey said he was, but nobody ever heard from him or has been able to find him. It's ridiculous. On day 9, they bring up Dr. Belusi, who worked on Casey's car, and he testified that he'd been in the position 30 to 45 times to smell decomposition. He said it's a smell you never forget, and it was the smell he smelled when he opened the door of Casey's car. Apparently, the garbage from Casey's trunk had been dried out, and that's what they do with evidence like this. It makes it easier to examine, and Jose asked, why did you do this to the garbage? And he responds, because that's protocol. It makes it easier to examine. And Jose's like, well, maybe that smell was garbage and we'll never know now because you dried it all out. And the Dr. Belusi was like, it wasn't garbage. It's the smell of human decomposition. I'm aware of it. I'm familiar with it. It's very hard to forget. Day 10 brings Karen Cosberg low on the stand. She's a trace evidence examiner for the FBI. She testifies that the hair found in the trunk of Casey's car most likely came from a dead body. Jose Baez questions her about a previous conviction referred to as the Gates case, where hairs found in a crime at a crime scene were indistinguishable from Gates' hair, and he was actually put in prison for this murder. He was later exonerated by the Innocence Project. Once they looked at the hair more closely, and they actually used mitochondrial DNA testing instead of just comparing it by sight. So once again, Jose Baez is doing his job, trying to show this hair could have come from anybody. It could have been transferred there on a bag that had been put in the trunk, because the test they use to look at these hairs to distinguish whether they are similar to other hairs is a sight test. They put the hairs under a microscope. He also seemed to be stuck on the fact that only one piece of hair in the trunk had the death banding on it. And he asks Karen Cosberg, can you say for sure that this hair came from a dead person? And she said, I can say that it's hair that's consistent to come from a dead person. So I actually took this evidence in and understood that the test to look at hairs and say that they're similar to other hairs or they're consistent with other hairs is just a visual test, and there was no DNA performed on this hair. Additionally, the death banding that was found on the hair was only found on one hair, and they recovered several hairs from the trunk. So that is hard to wrap my head around, that only one of the hairs was found to have the death banding on it. Is it possible that it came from Caylee when she was in the trunk after she had died? It's possible. It's also very possible that it could have come off of Caylee at some other time, and it could have just acquired that banding from a different method, which does happen as well. Day 11, Dr. Arpad Voss goes on the stand. He is the one who analyzed the air samples in the trunk and claimed there's chloroform in the vehicle. High levels of chloroform. He explained it all very well, scientifically, but easy to understand. You could tell he was passionate and excited about the work that he was doing with this kind of testing. He really liked what he was doing, and he had a good grasp of it. And it made Jose Baez look a little stupid when Jose tried to suggest that he was kind of overkicking his coverage, like going out of his expertise on this kind of investigation and this kind of evidence because Voss clearly knew what he was talking about. Dr. Voss claims that when he received the can of air to his laboratory, the can of the air samples from the trunk, he opened it and was taken aback by how strong the smell of decomposition was inside of that can. Dr. Voss is very familiar with the smell of death because he works with cadavers on a body farm. Later on in the trial, a defense's witness, Michael Sigman, a chemist at the National Center for Forensic Science, would testify that he had also tested the air in the trunk, but he had found that the compounds were mainly gasoline, although chloroform was present. He said he could not conclusively determine that there had been chloroform in that trunk. Chloroform is also found in many things, including common cleaning supplies and bleach. Upon cross-examination, he did admit that the methods he used to analyze the air in the trunk were not as good as the ones that Dr. Voss used. So this defense witness actually ended up hurting the defense's case. So all this goes on, right, for several weeks. The prosecution bringing up witnesses on the stand to talk about the evidence, the smell of decomposition, the smell of chloroform or the presence of chloroform, the hairs with the death banding, and Jose Baez brings up other witnesses of his own, including famous forensic scientist Dr. Warner Spitz, who I am a really big fan of, and he said that there's no sign that there was ever a dead body in that car. But the whole point now is that Jose Baez won this case by casting a shadow of reasonable doubt over every single piece of evidence the prosecution had. And they didn't really have a lot of evidence. If we're being serious, if we're being truthful with each other, this is kind of like the West Memphis 3 thing. They had somebody acting in a weird way that people didn't think she should be acting. They had evidence that may or may not have pointed to the presence of a dead body in the car, but there was no actual evidence of a dead body being in the car. It was all circumstantial. But unlike the West Memphis 3 case, where these 3 boys were being prosecuted for being different and acting differently than the people in the town thought they should act, this is the mother of the child who's missing and murdered. This is the mother of the child who's dead now. And when you talk about 3 little boys being killed, as was in the West Memphis 3 case, with Damien, Jesse, and Jason, they didn't really have the motive to kill those little boys. They didn't really even know them. There's no connection between the 6 of them. With Casey Anthony, there is a connection. There is a relationship. People are more likely to be killed by somebody they know than a stranger. And children are more likely to be killed by their parents than by anybody else. That's where this case differs for me. Do I think they had enough evidence to find her guilty? No. But I do think she had something to do with her daughter's death. I do think she knows exactly what happened to her daughter. I don't know if she acted alone, if she had help. Father George Anthony thinks she had help, doesn't think she could have done this on her own. But I do know in my heart, this is just my opinion, obviously I don't know for sure, I feel in my heart that she had something to do with this if she wasn't entirely responsible. And I do feel in my heart that she knows exactly what happened to her daughter. Additionally, the prosecution's theory that Casey had knocked her daughter out with chloroform was ridiculous. They said she had made the chloroform at home. And granted, she may have searched for how to make chloroform at home and then figured out it was way too difficult. Somebody with Casey's level of education and the lack of equipment that you would need to make chloroform, it would be impossible to make chloroform. It wouldn't work. It's not easy. It's not like you just put some stuff together and then you have chloroform. It takes equipment and expertise that Casey Anthony did not have. So the whole chloroform thing was just a reach for them. It was desperation. A more likely scenario, a more likely theory that people think is that she overdosed her daughter with Xanax, that she would give her daughter Xanax or antihistamines or things like that to make her daughter sleep so she could go out and party. One day she gave her too much. Now Casey was known to use Xanax. She hung out in a group of kids in that party scene that were commonly and always using Xanax. And a lot of people think that Zanny the nanny was like a code name for Xanax. Like, I'm gonna give my kid Xanax and she's gonna go to sleep, and when people ask where she is, I'm gonna say she's with Zanny the nanny. Now, somebody did comment on my second video yesterday with a theory that I had never thought of before, that possibly Casey had left Caylee in a car, like parked it and left her there, did her own thing, because it's really, really hot in Florida, and because maybe she lost track of time because she's not a super responsible person. When she came back, Caylee had died from, being locked in a parked car. I would even go as far as to say that possibly Casey could have given her daughter Xanax, put her in the car thinking she would sleep while she was doing whatever she was doing, and that she died as a result of that. So there's a lot of possibilities of what could have happened. I don't think that she murdered her daughter. I don't think that she woke up one day and was like, I don't want to be a mom anymore. I want to get rid of my kid. I do believe it was an accident, but it was an accident that was based on neglect. It was an accident based on bad parenting. It was an accident that could have easily been avoided. I do not think she murdered her daughter in cold blood, though. I could absolutely be wrong. The way her daughter's body was disposed of doesn't speak to me of a mother who accidentally killed her child and then wanted to cover it up. Some things were discovered during the prosecution's part of the trial, which was the laundry bag found in the Anthony home, the duct tape, which was a rare sort of duct tape that was also found in the Anthony home. But once again, this evidence cannot point to Casey alone, since 2 other people lived in that home. Another incriminating piece of evidence was a diary entry found in Casey's diary, and it was dated June 21st. Here's what the entry says. I have no regrets, just a bit worried. I just want for everything to work out okay. I completely trust my own judgment. I know I made the right decision. I just hope that the end justifies the means. I just want to know what the future holds for me. I guess I will soon see. This is the happiest that I have been in a very long time. I just hope my happiness will continue to grow. I've made new friends that I really like. I've surrounded myself with good people. I'm finally happy. Let's just hope that it doesn't change. Now, the image that you'll see of this diary entry page is clearly put there just to show you that one page. But if you look at the actual image of the diary, it's actually 2 pages. It's the left page and the right page. The diary entry dated June 21st is written on the right half of the page. On the left hand of the page, there's some doodles and it says Carpe Diem, seize the day. But then up in the upper left hand corner, it says 03. So this says to me she wrote this in 2003, not 2008, like the prosecution was trying to make it seem. Once again, I don't think she's innocent. Once again, I don't like this woman. Once again, I think she probably should have gone to jail. But I don't believe that this diary entry was written in 2008, just like a week after Caylee went missing. It could have been written in 2008 and she just wrote 03 in the corner after to make it seem like it was written in 2003, but the 03 was written in the same pen color, which was like a red maroon. It appeared to be legitimate. I don't know if testing was ever done on the ink to determine that, but probably not. On June 16th, the defense moved to acquit Casey Anthony on the grounds that the prosecution hadn't met their burden of proof. This motion was denied. Denied! On June 27th, the defense tried another motion and another trick, saying that all of a sudden Casey Anthony was not fit to stand trial mentally. And the judge was like, she's been seen by like 5 doctors. She's okay. Motion denied. The trial continued for many more weeks with much of the same, and then on July 4th, 2011, jury deliberations began. The next day, on July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey Anthony guilty of 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. They acquitted her of all other charges, including child neglect, which that blows my mind. That blows my mind. Now here's a piece of information that was not well known that I just discovered. When she was cleared of all criminal charges regarding child neglect and endangerment, Florida's DCF, so the Department for Children and Families, they actually found her guilty in their own investigation of child neglect. They released a report saying she was directly responsible, in their opinion, for the death of her child. Because of her failure to report the child missing for 31 days, she was as a result responsible for what happened to Caylee. Now, this report meant really nothing as far as legal matters went because she'd already been acquitted in a criminal court. Casey was sentenced by Judge Perry to serve 1 year per count of lying to law enforcement, so 4 years. But she had already been in jail for about 3 years and she got time off for good behavior. So on July 11th, just 5 days after she's acquitted, she's released. She's also fined $4,000, $1,000 per count of lying to law enforcement. Well, the state of Florida now, they're not happy because they spent a lot of time and money looking for a child that, according to Casey's own defense team, was never missing. So she screwed herself by that, kind of legally stating that she knew Caylee was dead the whole time. So they estimate the cost of this investigation to have cost over $500,000. On September 24th, Casey Anthony's ordered to repay the state of Florida $218,000, which is significantly less than $500,000, but it's significantly more than Casey Anthony had. The company, Texas EquuSearch, also sued Casey Anthony because they had put money into the search that had been conducted into Caylee's whereabouts, and they said that money could have gone into searching for somebody who was actually missing. The company eventually agreed to an unsecured settlement of $75,000. Now, the unsecured part means basically that Casey can choose to pay them back, some of it or all of it, but she's under no obligation legally or morally to do so. In 2012, new evidence came out that showed police had missed a June 16th, 2008 search on the Anthony's computer. This was the day that Caylee Anthony was last seen alive. They had not been checking the Firefox browser, apparently. They'd checked the other browsers, like the Google browser, but they hadn't checked Firefox, which is the browser that Casey would typically use. So a search was done on June 16th, 2008 for foolproof suffocation. I wonder if the prosecution had this information, would the trial have gone differently, since Caylee did have duct tape pasted over her mouth and her nose, but they did not have that information when they went to trial. But do you know who did have that information when they went to trial? Jose Baez. Jose Baez had had his own people look at the computer's hard drive and pull an internet search to see what was on the history, and he had that information. And he said when the prosecution didn't bring it out during trial, he was surprised, but thought they'd caught a lucky break. In 2017, Casey Anthony did an interview for the first time with the Associated Press. In this interview, she talks about what kind of person she thinks Caylee would be today. I'm gonna play a little clip of this interview for you.
Your understanding, how did she die?
I don't know.
You don't know. Something about drowning, possibly.
Everyone else has their theories. I don't know. I don't give a shit about what anybody thinks about me. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I never will. I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night.
So in June 2018, the Jose Baez scandal emerged, where a private investigator who had worked on the Casey Anthony case with her legal team, Dominic Casey, he claimed that Casey paid her legal fees to Jose using sexual favors. Now, Casey Anthony in 2016 had to claim bankruptcy, and Dominic Casey actually gave a 15-page affidavit in relation to the bankruptcy case. In this document, he says that Casey and Jose Baez had a sexual relationship before she went to trial for the murder of her daughter. Said one day he went to Jose's office during the trial, and Casey came running out of Jose Baez's office in just like her underwear, and she was giggling. Dominic Casey also claims he overheard a conversation between Baez and Casey Anthony, where Casey didn't want to do an interview or didn't want to do something with the media that they had already promised she would do, so Jose had to call and cancel. And when he got off the phone, he looked at her and said, "You owe me 3 BJs for this." So Dominic Casey overheard that as well. So his allegations are that Jose and Casey were sleeping together, or at the very least, she was performing sexual favors in exchange for legal fees. Obviously, Jose Baez denies these allegations, but they are out there. As far as we know at this time, Casey is still living in Florida. She's working for a private investigator who helped on her case. His name's Patrick McKenna, and she works for him doing like social media investigation work, I suppose. She searches on people's social media profiles to find like evidence that they're guilty or not guilty. I'm not sure exactly what she does for him. I'm not sure she even knows exactly what she does for him. She attempted to open up a photography studio before this, but it failed when nobody really wanted to use her to capture their precious life's moments. She had started a Twitter account for the photography page, and it was just blown up and inundated with people who were like, "You killed your kid, you shouldn't be free right now," like just harassment essentially. So she shut that down and kind of went away from opening her own business. Casey Anthony is out of contact with her family. George and Lee Anthony don't want to have anything to do with her, don't have any contact with her, and don't plan on ever having any contact with her.
I'm going to be very blunt with this. I don't want to see her, I don't want to talk to her.
Is your daughter Casey dead to you?
Well,
I sleep pretty good at night.
I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night.
Cindy does not rest. I do not rest. I don't get a restful night's sleep. I know she hasn't for years.
Cindy Anthony, though, still holds on to the belief that her daughter was not involved in her granddaughter's death. And on that, she and George Anthony differ. He believes that Casey did have something to do with Caylee's death, but like I said, he thinks she had help. He just doesn't know who.
Is she a killer?
Do you think she intentionally wanted to kill Caylee?
I don't think she intentionally wanted to.
Okay,
I don't think she intentionally wanted to, but she should be in jail because of Caylee not being here.
Even though Casey and Cindy Anthony are not close, they don't really talk anymore. In 2012, both Cindy and Casey took to wearing matching vials of Caylee Anthony's ashes around their necks. In March of 2017, it was reported that Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson might be working together for a reality television show. Now, Casey Anthony was always a legit hardcore O.J. supporter, said he was innocent. She knew, she had proof. She said she had proof he was innocent. Always maintained his innocence, so we have two of the most notorious guilty people ever to walk, and it's just kind of funny to me that they would team up and make a reality show. It's absolutely ridiculous. I know that people would watch it. Hell, I would watch it. But it's so insensitive. Just a slap in the face to every single person who's sitting here and knowing that they're guilty of killing their loved ones, and now they're profiting off of it. I don't know exactly what's going on with that. I tried to find out. I know there's a lot of pushback. George and Cindy Anthony, I do believe, said that if Casey tried to do something which would cause her to profit from her daughter's death, they would sue her. So
My daughter would sell her story and that she would want to talk about it and get paid. Yes.
You would file a lawsuit?
Oh, absolutely I would. Absolutely I would.
Would you support a lawsuit against your daughter?
I don't think it'll ever come to that. I don't think she'll sell her story.
George seems to think that it might. And now there are rumors of reality shows, even a show with her and O.J. Simpson.
Oh, God.
What do you say to that?
If it came down to that, I probably would.
Not sure how that would work, but that's what they claim. So in my closing statements of this case, I do believe Casey Anthony had something to do with this, and I think she knows what happened to her daughter. I think that the prosecution put on a bad case. The prosecution really didn't have a lot of good evidence. They definitely didn't have enough good evidence to go for the death penalty. When you put a death penalty in front of a jury, they get really weirded out. When you put the death penalty on the table, the quality of the evidence needs to rise to meet the severity of putting the death penalty on the table. There were a lot of jurors who said they just couldn't feel comfortable knowing that Caylee had already died and that Casey could possibly be just a mother who'd lost her child, putting that girl on death row. There's a lot of people who thought she was probably guilty, but they weren't sure, so they couldn't make that call. The fact that she wasn't charged with child neglect, though, is what blows my mind. Clearly, there was child neglect involved here. She should have been charged for that. The evidence just wasn't enough. It seemed like enough to us because we know so much now about the days after Caylee went missing and how Casey acted and what she did. Just by that, I would say she was guilty, but once again, that's not enough to send someone to prison or to death row. So that is why she got off. Now, the internet search done on June 16th for foolproof suffocation that the forensic specialist who was looking into the computer missed, that may have made a little bit of a difference. I also wonder, looking at her internet searches on March 17th and March 21st, if Casey was planning on killing her parents. She was telling her friends that her parents were gonna leave her the house. She was telling her friend Amy that she was gonna move in. She was certain of this. And she was looking into terms like self-defense, household items that can be used as weapons. Those aren't things you look into when you're planning on killing a 2-year-old child. You're not ever going to kill a 2-year-old child and then say it was self-defense. So I'm wondering, just speculation, if she was planning on killing one or both of her parents to try to kind of get them out of her life so she could live her own life. That's just my thoughts, and it was kind of something weird that popped into my head while I was looking through her internet searches. I was like, these don't seem like the internet searches you would search for if you were planning on killing like a defenseless little child. These seem like the kind of searches you would search for if you were planning on killing an adult who you could then turn around and say it was self-defense. You guys let me know what you think in the comments. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me through this series. I know that I will hold my kids a little bit tighter today. I'm gonna take a little bit of a break from researching these super serious cases that just recently happened, you know, that are so close to home and so close in the time that we live in now. I'm going to look into a case for my next video that's a little bit more historical, and I've already given you guys a hint, so a lot of you already kind of guessed it, but I'm excited to jump into the next video, but it's going to be hard for me to pull away from the attachment that I've, you know, come to find with this case. So I really thank you guys for being here. I thank you for all your kind comments and all your kind words in my comment section. I want to know in the comments now whether you think she's guilty or innocent. And what do you think about George Anthony? What do you think about George Anthony's involvement in this whole thing? All right, guys, I will see you next time. I hope you have a beautiful day. Stay kind and stay beautiful. Bye.
Through the tears, the light is faded as heavy hearts consume all you are. Memories, they spin in circles, and every breath reveals one more scar. Curl your arms around a whisper as she lies against your skin. Feel the warmth surround her halo. Heaven will embrace your
Mama, Papa, put these in my bowl.